The morning air in Sacramento was thick with the promise of rain, a typical late November gloom that matched the knot tightening in my stomach. I stood before the full-length mirror in my apartment, adjusting the collar of my navy blue blazer, the one I'd bought specifically for today. The fabric felt stiff against my skin, a constant reminder of the formal occasion that lay ahead. My reflection showed a woman of 32 with dark circles under her eyes, evidence of sleepless nights spent worrying about what would happen at the inheritance hearing. My phone buzzed on the dresser, vibrating against the polished wood. I picked it up without looking at the screen. "Hello? Clara? It's Michael. Are you ready?" My brother's voice came through the speaker, strained and distant. I sighed, running a hand through my chestnut hair. "As ready as I'll ever be. Are you driving over?" "Yeah, I'll be there in 15 minutes. Mom's already at the courthouse with her lawyer." Of course she was. My mother, Eleanor Thompson, always arrived early to important events, a habit she'd drilled into us since childhood. But today, her punctuality felt like a strategic move, another chess piece in the game she'd been playing since Dad died 3 months ago. "I'll be waiting," I said, ending the call. The apartment felt too quiet as I moved through the living room, my heels clicking against the hardwood floors. I paused by the mantelpiece, where a photograph of our family sat in a silver frame. Dad stood between Mom and me, his arm around her shoulder, while Michael and our younger sister Sarah stood in front. We were all smiling at the camera, a perfect picture of familial happiness captured during our last vacation to Lake Tahoe. Now, that image seemed like a cruel joke, a reminder of what we had lost not just in death but in the aftermath. Dad, Richard Thompson, had been a successful real estate developer in Sacramento for over 30 years. He'd built a small empire from nothing, starting with a single fixer-upper that he renovated and sold for a modest profit. Through hard work and an uncanny ability to spot up-and-coming neighborhoods, he'd expanded his business, eventually owning properties throughout Northern California. His success had provided our family with a comfortable life, private education, and the security that came with financial stability. But his death from a sudden heart attack at 65 had left us not just grieving but grappling with the question of his legacy. And according to the letter from his attorney that had arrived 2 weeks after his funeral, Dad had left everything to be divided equally among his 3 children, Michael, Sarah, and me, with a modest annual allowance for Mom. That letter had been the catalyst for the current situation. Mom had contested the will, claiming that Dad had promised her more, that he had intended to provide for her the rest of her life. And now, here we were, heading to a courthouse to determine the fate of Dad's estate. I grabbed my purse and keys from the kitchen counter, the metal jangling in the silence. As I locked the apartment door behind me, I couldn't shake the feeling that today would change everything, that the bonds holding our family together would either strengthen or break completely under the weight of grief and greed. The elevator ride to the ground floor was smooth and silent, the mirrored walls reflecting my anxious expression back at me. When the doors opened, I stepped into the lobby, where Mrs. Henderson, the building's manager, was watering the plants near the entrance. "Good morning, Clara," she said, her voice warm and motherly. "Big day today?" I forced a smile. "Something like that. How did you know?" She gestured toward my attire. "You only wear that blazer when you mean business. Whatever it is, I hope it goes well." "Thank you, Mrs. Henderson," I said, pushing through the glass doors into the cool morning air. The sky was a dull gray, heavy with unshed rain. A few drops splattered against the pavement as I walked to the curb to wait for Michael. The air smelled of wet asphalt and impending storms, a scent that had always reminded me of change, of transitions. Michael's black BMW pulled up 5 minutes later, sleek and polished against the dreary backdrop. I slid into the passenger seat, the leather cool against my legs. "Morning," he said, his eyes fixed on the road as he pulled away from the curb. "Did you eat anything?" I couldn't stomach it, I admitted, adjusting my seatbelt. "You?" "Coffee and a bagel. Sarah's meeting us there. She's coming straight from work." I nodded, watching the city streets blur past us. Sacramento was waking up, with people hurrying along sidewalks, cars honking in the distance, the general hum of a city coming to life. But inside the car, there was only silence, heavy with unspoken words. "Have you talked to Mom recently?" I asked, breaking the quiet. Michael's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "She called yesterday. Wanted to know if we'd reconsidered her offer." "And what offer was that?" "The one where she gets 60% of everything and we split the rest." He sighed, running a hand through his dark hair, so like Dad's. "She said it's fair, that she was married to Dad for 40 years, that she deserves more than what the will offers." "What about what Dad wanted?" "What he explicitly stated in his will. According to Mom, the will doesn't reflect his true intentions. She says he was planning to update it but never got the chance." I shook my head, staring out the window. "That's convenient, isn't it? That he died right before he could supposedly change everything in her favor." Clara, I'm not saying I agree with her. I'm just telling you what she said. I know, I replied, my voice softer. I'm sorry. It's just, this is so hard. Dad's barely been gone 3 months, and we're already fighting over his money like vultures. Michael didn't respond, but I could see the tension in his jaw, the way his shoulders hunched forward. He was feeling it too, the weight of this situation, the grief mixed with anger and confusion. The courthouse came into view, a formidable stone building with large columns and American flags flanking the entrance. As Michael turned into the parking garage, I felt a surge of anxiety, a physical manifestation of the dread that had been building for weeks. Whatever happens in there, Michael said, killing the engine, we stick together, okay? You, me, and Sarah. We're a team. I nodded, though I wasn't entirely convinced. Our family had been fractured before Dad's death, but now those cracks had widened into chasms, threatening to swallow us whole. The walk from the parking garage to the courthouse was short but felt endless. The air grew cooler as we approached the building, and the first drops of rain began to fall, dark spots appearing on the pavement around us. Inside, the courthouse was bustling with activity, the echo of footsteps and hushed conversations creating a symphony of legal proceedings. We found the right courtroom on the 3rd floor, a wood-paneled space with rows of benches and a raised judge's bench at the front. Mom was already there, sitting with her lawyer, a sharp-looking woman in a tailored suit. She was dressed impeccably in a cream-colored dress and matching jacket, her blonde hair styled perfectly, her makeup flawless. She looked every bit the grieving widow, except for the determined glint in her blue eyes. Clara, Michael, she said as we approached, her voice smooth as silk. You're both looking well. Mom, I replied, taking a seat on the opposite side of the aisle. Michael sat beside me, creating a physical barrier between us and our mother. Sarah arrived a few minutes later, rushing in with her work clothes still on, a navy blue skirt and white blouse, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. As a pediatric nurse at Sacramento General, she often worked long hours, and today was no exception. Sorry I'm late, she whispered, sitting next to me. There was an emergency at the hospital. How are you holding up? I asked, taking in her tired eyes and the slight tremor in her hands. She shook her head. Not great. I almost didn't come. This feels wrong, Clara. All of it. Dad's not even cold in his grave, and we're. I know, I said, squeezing her hand. But we have to be here. We have to protect what Dad wanted. Sarah nodded, but I could see the conflict in her expression. Of all of us, she had always been the most sensitive, the most empathetic. She felt things deeply, and this situation was tearing her apart. The judge entered a few minutes later, a woman in her late 50s with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun. Everyone rose as she took her seat, and the room fell silent. Good morning, she said, her voice carrying through the courtroom. We are here today to discuss the matter of the estate of Richard Thompson. Let's begin with opening statements. Mom's lawyer stood first, a confident woman named Victoria Sterling. She walked to the center of the room, her heels clicking against the wooden floor. Your Honor, she began, we are here today because the last will and testament of Richard Thompson does not accurately reflect his true intentions regarding the distribution of his estate. My client, Eleanor Thompson, was married to Richard for 40 years. She stood by him through the ups and downs of building his business, raised his 3 children, and managed their household. It was their understanding that upon his passing, she would receive the family home, a substantial portion of his liquid assets, and a yearly allowance that would allow her to maintain the lifestyle to which she had become accustomed. Victoria paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. Unfortunately, the will presented to this court leaves Mrs. Thompson with only a modest annual allowance and none of the properties she called home for decades. We believe this is because Mr. Thompson intended to update his will but passed away before he could do so. We have witnesses who can testify to conversations with Mr. Thompson where he expressed his desire to provide more adequately for his wife. I felt a surge of anger rise in my chest. This was Mom's strategy, to paint herself as the devoted, misunderstood widow who had been cheated out of what was rightfully hers. The problem was, there was some truth to her story. Dad had mentioned updating his will a few times in the months before his death, but he'd never specified what changes he wanted to make. Our lawyer, a middle-aged man named David Chen, stood when Victoria finished. He approached the center of the room with a calm demeanor that contrasted sharply with Victoria's intensity. Your Honor, he began, while we sympathize with Mrs. Thompson's loss, the fact remains that Richard Thompson executed a legally binding will on January 15 of last year. This will was prepared by his longtime attorney, witnessed by 2 impartial parties, and notarized according to California state law. There is no evidence to suggest that Mr. Thompson intended to change this will before his death. David turned to face the judge directly. Furthermore, the will does provide for Mrs. Thompson. It grants her an annual allowance of $120,000 for the rest of her life, tax-free. It also states that she may continue to live in the family home for up to 2 years after Mr. Thompson's passing, rent-free, to give her time to find suitable accommodation. These provisions, while perhaps not as generous as Mrs. Thompson might have hoped, demonstrate that Mr. Thompson did consider his wife's well-being when planning his estate. He paused, looking over at Mom before continuing. The claim that Mr. Thompson intended to provide more for his wife is based on hearsay and wishful thinking, not on any legal documentation. The will as it stands is clear, and we ask that it be honored as the final expression of Richard Thompson's wishes. The judge nodded, making notes on a pad in front of her. Thank you, counsel. Let's hear from the first witness. Victoria called Mom to the stand first. As she walked to the witness box, I couldn't help but notice how composed she appeared, how confident. She had always been like that, able to maintain her poise in the most stressful situations, a trait that had served her well as the wife of a successful businessman. Mrs. Thompson, Victoria began, can you describe your relationship with your late husband? Mom smiled, a sad, practiced expression. Richard and I were married for 40 years. We met in college, fell in love, and built a life together. He was a wonderful man, a devoted husband and father. We had our ups and downs, of course, like any couple, but we always worked through our problems. We were partners in every sense of the word. And did you discuss his estate planning with him? Yes, many times over the years. Richard always said he wanted to make sure I was taken care of if anything happened to him. He knew I had given up my career as a teacher to raise our children and manage our home, and he appreciated the sacrifices I had made for our family. Did you discuss his will specifically? Yes. In the months before he passed, Richard mentioned several times that he needed to update his will. He said the current version didn't adequately provide for me, and he wanted to make changes to ensure I could maintain my standard of living after he was gone. Did he specify what changes he wanted to make? Not in detail, but he did say he wanted me to have the family home outright, a larger portion of his liquid assets, and a more substantial annual allowance. He was very clear about that. Victoria nodded, walking over to the judge's bench. Your Honor, we have a witness who can corroborate Mrs. Thompson's testimony about these conversations. She called forward a man I recognized as George Miller, Dad's business partner for over 20 years. As he took the stand, I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. George had always been loyal to Dad, but he had also always had a soft spot for Mom. Mr. Miller, Victoria began, you were Richard Thompson's business partner for many years, is that correct? Yes, for 23 years, George replied, his voice steady. And did you have conversations with Mr. Thompson about his estate planning? Yes, on several occasions. Richard was a meticulous planner, always thinking ahead. He mentioned more than once that he needed to update his will to provide more adequately for Eleanor. Can you recall what he said specifically? George hesitated, glancing over at Mom before continuing. He said that the current will was too focused on his children and didn't take into account everything Eleanor had done for the family over the years. He mentioned wanting to leave her the family home and a larger portion of his assets. And when were these conversations? The most recent one was about 2 weeks before he passed. We were having lunch, and he brought it up again. He said he had an appointment with his attorney the following week to discuss updating his will. I felt Michael shift beside me, and I knew he was thinking the same thing I was. If Dad had scheduled an appointment with his attorney to update his will, why didn't the attorney mention it when we met with him after Dad's death? David stood to cross-examine George. Mr. Miller, you say that Mr. Thompson mentioned updating his will 2 weeks before he died. Did he show you any documentation of this appointment with his attorney? No, he just mentioned it in passing. Did he specify what changes he wanted to make to his will? Not in detail, no. Just that he wanted to provide more for Eleanor. So to be clear, you have no concrete evidence that Mr. Thompson intended to change his will, only his word? George bristled. Richard was a man of his word. If he said he was going to do something, he did it. But he didn't do this, did he? David pressed. He died before he could allegedly update his will, leaving only the original will as evidence of his intentions. Objection, Victoria said, rising to her feet. Counsel is badgering the witness. Sustained, the judge said. Mr. Chen, please stick to relevant questions. David nodded. No further questions, Your Honor. The judge called for a recess, and we all filed out of the courtroom into the hallway. Mom and her lawyer went in one direction, while we gathered in a small group near the windows overlooking the street. This is worse than I thought, Michael said, running a hand through his hair. George's testimony adds credibility to Mom's claims. George has always been partial to Mom, I countered. He'd say anything to help her. But what if it's true? Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. What if Dad really did intend to change his will? Then he would have, I said, perhaps more harshly than I intended. Dad was nothing if not thorough. If he wanted to update his will, he would have done it. Unless something prevented him, Michael suggested. He died suddenly, after all. I shook my head. I don't buy it. Dad had been talking about updating his will for years. If he was serious about it, he would have done it long ago. Maybe he was procrastinating, Sarah offered. You know how Dad was sometimes. He'd put things off until the last minute. Something this important? I asked, incredulous. No, Dad wouldn't procrastinate about his will. As we debated, I noticed Mom watching us from across the hallway, a knowing smile on her face. She knew she was getting to us, planting seeds of doubt that would grow and fester if left unchecked. Let's not do this here, Michael said, lowering his voice. We need to present a united front. You're right, I agreed, though I could feel the divisions between us widening with every passing moment. The bailiff called us back into the courtroom, and we resumed our positions on opposite sides of the aisle. The next witness called was Dad's attorney, a man named Harold Wilson who had been handling his legal affairs for decades. Mr. Wilson, Victoria began, did Richard Thompson ever mention updating his will in the months before his death? Harold adjusted his glasses, a nervous habit I'd witnessed many times over the years. Yes, he did mention it during our last meeting, about a month before he passed. And what did he say? He said he wanted to review his estate plan to ensure it's still aligned with his wishes. He didn't specify what changes he wanted to make, just that he wanted to review everything. Did he schedule a follow-up appointment? Yes, for the week after he passed. Unfortunately, he died before we could meet. Victoria nodded, a triumphant look on her face. So it's possible that Mr. Thompson intended to make changes to his will but died before he could do so? It's possible, yes, Harold admitted, but I can't speculate on what those changes might have been. David stood to cross-examine Harold. Mr. Wilson, in your professional opinion, if a client mentions updating their will but doesn't follow through before their death, what document should be used to determine their intentions? The most recent legally executed will, of course. And in this case, that would be the will dated January 15th of last year? Yes, that's correct. Thank you, David said, sitting down. The judge called for a lunch recess, and we all dispersed, some to the courthouse cafeteria, others to nearby restaurants. Michael, Sarah, and I found a quiet corner in a small cafe across the street, the smell of coffee and sandwiches doing little to ease our tension. Harold's testimony didn't help, Michael said, stirring his coffee absent-mindedly. He confirmed that Dad wanted to review his will. But he also confirmed that there's no evidence Dad intended to make specific changes, I countered. Mom's case is built on speculation. Speculation that's being supported by Dad's own attorney and business partner, Sarah pointed out. That's not nothing. I sighed, picking at the sandwich I had ordered but couldn't bring myself to eat. What do you think we should do? Michael looked at Sarah, then at me. Maybe we should consider a settlement. What? I asked, my voice rising. You can't be serious. Clara, think about it, he said, leaning forward. Mom has some credibility on her side. If we lose, we could end up with nothing, or at least less than what Dad intended for us. Dad intended for us to have equal shares of his estate, I reminded him. That's what the will says. And the will also says Mom gets $120,000 a year and can stay in the family home for 2 years, Michael countered. Maybe we should offer her more than that, as a compromise. Like what? 50% of the liquid assets, and she can stay in the family home as long as she wants. I stared at him, incredulous. That's almost exactly what she's asking for. Why are we even here if we're just going to give in? Because we're family, Clara, Sarah said softly. Maybe Dad would have wanted us to take care of Mom, regardless of what the will says. I felt a surge of frustration, mixed with hurt. So you're both against me now? You think I should just give up what Dad wanted for us? No one's saying that, Michael said, reaching across the table to touch my arm. We're just trying to find a solution that doesn't tear our family apart completely. Our family is already torn apart, I said, pulling my arm away. This hearing is just making it official. We finished our meal in silence, the tension between us palpable. As we walked back to the courthouse, the rain began to fall in earnest, darkening the pavement and reflecting our somber moods. The afternoon session brought more witnesses, all testifying to Dad's supposed intentions to provide more for Mom. Neighbors, friends, even our aunt on Mom's side, all painted a picture of a devoted husband who wanted to ensure his wife's comfort after his death. With each testimony, I felt our case weakening, Dad's clear intentions as expressed in his will becoming clouded by speculation and hearsay. Finally, it was our turn to call witnesses. David called me first, and as I walked to the witness box, my heart pounded in my chest. I could feel Mom's eyes on me, her expression unreadable. Miss Thompson, David began, can you describe your relationship with your father? I took a deep breath, trying to steady my voice. Dad and I were close. We talked regularly, met for lunch at least once a month, and I helped him with some of his business affairs in the years before he passed. Did you discuss his estate planning with him? Yes, several times. He showed me the will when he updated it last year, explained his reasoning for how he wanted to divide his assets. And what was that reasoning? He said he wanted to provide for all of us equally. He believed that Michael, Sarah, and I were all capable of managing our inheritance responsibly, and he wanted to give us the means to build our own futures. As for Mom, he said he had provided for her in a way that would ensure her comfort while still allowing his children to benefit from his life's work. Did he ever mention wanting to change the will? No. He was satisfied with how it was structured and felt it accurately reflected his wishes. David nodded, then asked, did your father ever express concerns about your mother's ability to manage a large inheritance? I hesitated, glancing over at Mom. Her expression had hardened, her eyes narrowed slightly. Yes, I said finally. He mentioned on a few occasions that Mom wasn't very good with financial matters, that she tended to spend impulsively. He was worried that if she received a large sum of money, she might not manage it wisely. Objection, Victoria said, rising to her feet. Relevance? The judge considered for a moment. I'll allow it, but keep your answers focused on the will, Miss Thompson. Did your father provide specific examples of your mother's financial irresponsibility? David asked. Yes, I replied, taking a deep breath. He mentioned that Mom had run up significant credit card debt on several occasions, that she had made some poor investment decisions, and that she had a tendency to make large purchases without consulting him. Can you be more specific? I swallowed hard, knowing this would hurt Mom but also knowing it was relevant to Dad's intentions. About 6 months before he died, Dad discovered that Mom had spent nearly $50,000 on designer clothes and accessories in a 3-month period. When he confronted her about it, she said she deserved to treat herself, that she had sacrificed a lot for the family and deserved to enjoy the fruits of Dad's success. Did your father say how this affected his estate planning? Yes. He said it reinforced his decision to provide Mom with an annual allowance rather than a lump sum. He wanted to ensure she was taken care of but didn't want to risk her squandering a large inheritance. I could feel Mom's anger from across the room, but I kept my eyes focused on David, on the judge, on anything but her pained expression. No further questions, David said, sitting down. Victoria stood to cross-examine me, her approach measured and deliberate. Miss Thompson, would you say you had a good relationship with your mother? I hesitated. We've had our ups and downs. Would you describe your relationship as strained? At times, yes. And these times, were they perhaps when you disagreed about financial matters? Sometimes, I admitted. Is it possible, Victoria asked, her voice soft but probing, that you're testifying against your mother's interests because of personal animosity rather than because of your father's true intentions? No, I said firmly. I'm testifying to what Dad told me, what he wanted. But you admit that your relationship with your mother has been strained, that you've had disagreements about money. Isn't it possible that you're interpreting your father's intentions through the lens of your own feelings about your mother? Objection, David said, standing. Counsel is speculating about the witness's motivations. Sustained, the judge said. Miss Sterling, please stick to relevant questions. Victoria nodded, but I could see she had made her point. She had planted a seed of doubt about my testimony, suggesting it was colored by personal feelings rather than objective truth. No further questions, she said, sitting down. As I returned to my seat, I avoided looking at Mom, but I could feel her anger like a physical presence in the room. I had betrayed her in the most public way possible, revealing private family matters in a courtroom. But I had also told the truth, or at least my version of it. David called Michael next, and his testimony largely corroborated mine. He confirmed that Dad had shown him the will and explained his reasoning, and he also confirmed Dad's concerns about Mom's spending habits. Sarah, however, was more hesitant when called to the stand. Miss Thompson, David began, did your father discuss his will with you? Yes, she said softly, but not in as much detail as he did with Clara and Michael. What did he tell you? Just that he had updated his will, that he wanted to provide for all of us. He didn't go into specifics. Did he express any concerns about your mother's ability to manage a large inheritance? Sarah hesitated, glancing over at Mom. He mentioned once or twice that Mom wasn't very good with saving money, but he didn't elaborate. Did he say how this affected his estate planning? No, not specifically. David frowned slightly, clearly disappointed with Sarah's testimony. No further questions, he said, sitting down. Victoria stood to cross-examine Sarah, her approach gentle compared to her cross-examination of me. "Miss Thompson, would you describe yourself as close to your mother?" "Yes," Sarah replied without hesitation. "I talk to Mom almost every day." "And do you believe your father would have wanted to provide adequately for your mother?" "Yes, of course. Dad loved Mom very much." "Then doesn't it seem strange to you that he would leave her with only a modest allowance while dividing the bulk of his estate among his children?" Sarah bit her lower lip, a nervous habit she'd had since childhood. "I don't know. Dad had his reasons, I'm sure. But you can't help but wonder if he intended to provide more for your mother, can you?" Victoria pressed. I don't know," Sarah admitted, her voice barely audible. "No further questions," Victoria said, giving Sarah a sympathetic smile as she returned to her seat. As the day's proceedings came to an end, I felt a sense of dread settling over me. Our case was weaker than I had anticipated, with Dad's clear intentions as expressed in his will being challenged by speculation and hearsay. And Sarah's hesitant testimony had only added to the uncertainty. The judge announced that the hearing would continue the following day, and we all filed out of the courtroom, exhausted and emotionally drained. As we gathered in the hallway, Mom approached us, her expression unreadable. "I hope you're all proud of yourselves," she said, her voice cold. "Airing our family's dirty laundry in public, trying to paint me as an irresponsible spendthrift." "Mom, that's not what we were trying to do," Michael began, but she cut him off. "Don't lie to me, Michael. I know exactly what you were doing. All of you." Her eyes settled on me. "Especially you, Clara. After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me." "What have you done for me, Mom?" I asked, my voice shaking with anger and hurt. "Except try to control every aspect of my life, criticize my choices, and make me feel inadequate? I gave you life, you ungrateful child. I raised you, sacrificed for you, and this is how you treat me." "Raised me? You hired nannies to raise us while you played tennis and lunched with your friends. And your sacrifices? What sacrifices were those? Having to give up your teaching career? That was your choice, not something Dad forced on you." "How dare you," Mom said, her voice dangerously low. "After your father and I provided you with everything, private school, college, a car when you turned 16, this is the respect you show us?" "Respect is earned, Mom, not given freely. And you've done very little to earn my respect lately." "That's enough," Michael said, stepping between us. "This isn't helping anyone." Mom's eyes flashed with anger. "Stay out of this, Michael. This is between me and your ungrateful sister." "It's between all of us," Sarah said softly. "We're a family, and we're tearing each other apart." "A family?" Mom laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Some family. You three have ganged up against me, trying to cheat me out of what's rightfully mine." "What's rightfully yours is what Dad left you in his will," I shot back. "Not what you think you deserve." "We'll see about that," Mom said, turning on her heel and walking away, her lawyer following close behind. The three of us stood in silence for a moment, the weight of our confrontation hanging in the air. "She's never going to forgive us," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "Maybe not," Michael admitted. "But we have to do what's right, what Dad wanted." "And what if we're wrong?" I asked, the doubt that had been creeping in all day finally finding its voice. What if Dad really did intend to provide more for Mom, and we're fighting against his true wishes? Michael sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know, Clara. I really don't know." As we left the courthouse and stepped out into the rainy evening, I felt a profound sense of loss, not just for Dad but for the family we had once been. The inheritance hearing wasn't just about money, it was about trust, loyalty, and the bonds that had once held us together. And as we went our separate ways, Michael to his car, Sarah to the bus stop, me to my apartment, I wondered if those bonds could ever be repaired, or if they were broken beyond repair. The night passed restlessly, with sleep eluding me as my mind replayed the day's events over and over. Every word spoken in that courtroom, every accusation hurled in the hallway, every expression of hurt and anger on my family's faces, it all played on a continuous loop in my mind, a tormenting reminder of how far we had fallen. By morning, I felt exhausted but resolved. Whatever happened today, I would stand by what I believed to be Dad's true intentions, even if it meant further alienating my mother and possibly my siblings. I had to believe that Dad knew what he was doing when he created his will, that he had valid reasons for structuring it the way he had. The second day of the hearing began much like the first, with the courtroom filled to capacity and an air of tension so thick it felt almost suffocating. Mom was already there when we arrived, dressed in another impeccably tailored outfit, her expression calm and composed. She had always been able to compartmentalize her emotions, to present a facade of control even when she was feeling anything but. The judge called the hearing to order, and Victoria stood to present her final arguments. Your Honor, she began, we have heard testimony from multiple witnesses, all of whom corroborate the fact that Richard Thompson intended to provide more adequately for his wife than what is outlined in his current will. We have heard from his business partner, his attorney, and friends who all confirmed that Mr. Thompson mentioned updating his will to ensure his wife's comfort after his passing. She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. While the current will is a legally binding document, it does not reflect Mr. Thompson's most recent intentions. The testimony we have heard clearly establishes that Mr. Thompson was in the process of updating his estate plan when he died suddenly, leaving his wife with less than what he intended for her. Victoria walked over to the judge's bench, her voice softening slightly. Your Honor, Eleanor Thompson stood by her husband for 40 years. She raised his children, managed their home, and supported him through the ups and downs of building his business. She sacrificed her own career to devote herself to her family. Is it not reasonable to believe that a man who loved his wife as much as Richard Thompson loved Eleanor would want to ensure her comfort and security after his death? She turned to face us, her expression sympathetic. We are not asking that the children be disinherited or left with nothing. We are simply asking that the court recognize Richard Thompson's true intentions and adjust the distribution of his estate accordingly. We propose that Eleanor Thompson receive 60% of the estate, with the remaining 40% to be divided equally among the 3 children. This would allow Mrs. Thompson to maintain her standard of living while still providing a substantial inheritance for her children. As Victoria concluded her argument, I felt a surge of anger mixed with fear. Her proposal was almost exactly what Mom had been demanding from the beginning, and her argument was compelling, painting Mom as the devoted, misunderstood widow who deserved more than what Dad had provided in his will. David stood to present our counterargument, his demeanor calm and measured. Your Honor, he began, while we sympathize with Mrs. Thompson's loss, the fact remains that Richard Thompson executed a legally binding will on January 15 of last year. This will was prepared by his longtime attorney, witnessed by 2 impartial parties, and notarized according to California state law. It represents Mr. Thompson's final wishes regarding the distribution of his estate. David walked to the center of the room, his voice clear and confident. The testimony we have heard about Mr. Thompson's supposed intentions to update his will is based on speculation and hearsay. While it's true that Mr. Thompson mentioned reviewing his estate plan, there is no concrete evidence that he intended to make specific changes, let alone the drastic changes being proposed by the plaintiff. He turned to face the judge directly. Furthermore, the will as it stands does provide for Mrs. Thompson. It grants her an annual allowance of $120,000 for the rest of her life, tax-free. It also states that she may continue to live in the family home for up to 2 years after Mr. Thompson's passing, rent-free. These provisions, while perhaps not as generous as Mrs. Thompson might have hoped, demonstrate that Mr. Thompson did consider his wife's well-being when planning his estate. David paused, looking over at Mom before continuing. The testimony about Mrs. Thompson's spending habits and financial irresponsibility is relevant because it sheds light on Mr. Thompson's reasoning for structuring his will the way he did. It shows that he had valid concerns about his wife's ability to manage a large inheritance, and that he took steps to ensure she would be provided for while also protecting his children's inheritance. He concluded, Your Honor, Richard Thompson was a meticulous planner. If he had intended to make significant changes to his will, he would have done so. The will as it stands represents his true intentions, and we ask that it be honored as the final expression of his wishes. As David concluded, I felt a sense of relief. His argument was logical and well-reasoned, countering Victoria's emotional appeal with facts and legal principles. But as I looked over at the judge, I couldn't read her expression, couldn't tell which way she was leaning. The judge nodded, making notes on a pad in front of her. Thank you, counsel. I'll take a short recess to consider my decision, then we'll reconvene. As we filed out of the courtroom, the tension was palpable. This was it, the moment that would determine the fate of Dad's estate, and by extension, the future of our family. Mom and her lawyer went in one direction, while we gathered in a small group near the windows overlooking the street. I think David made a strong argument, Michael said, though his tone lacked conviction. I hope so, I replied, my stomach churning with anxiety. But Victoria's argument was compelling too. What do you think the judge will decide? Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know, Michael admitted. It could go either way. As we waited for the bailiff to call us back into the courtroom, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen, that this day would bring not just a decision about Dad's estate but a revelation that would change everything. The bailiff finally called us back into the courtroom, and we resumed our positions on opposite sides of the aisle. The judge took her seat, and the room fell silent. After careful consideration of the testimony and arguments presented, she began, I have reached a decision. While the current will is a legally binding document, the testimony we have heard suggests that Richard Thompson may have intended to provide more for his wife than what is outlined in the will. My heart sank as I listened to her words. It sounded like she was leaning in Mom's favor. However, the judge continued, the evidence of these supposed intentions is based primarily on speculation and hearsay. There is no concrete evidence that Mr. Thompson intended to make specific changes to his will, let alone the drastic changes being proposed by the plaintiff. I felt a surge of hope as she continued, the will as it stands does provide for Mrs. Thompson, albeit not as generously as she might have hoped. It grants her an annual allowance of $120,000 for the rest of her life, tax-free, and allows her to continue living in the family home for up to 2 years after Mr. Thompson's passing, rent-free. The judge paused, looking directly at Mom. Mrs. Thompson, while I sympathize with your loss and understand your desire to maintain your standard of living, the fact remains that your husband executed a legally binding will that represents his final wishes. As such, I must uphold that will as written. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. We had won. Dad's wishes would be honored. However, the judge continued, and my relief turned to apprehension. There is one matter that has come to my attention that requires further consideration. Yesterday, after the proceedings, I received a call from the Sacramento County Recorder's Office regarding a document that was recently filed in relation to the Thompson estate. I looked over at Michael and Sarah, confusion evident on their faces. What document could the Recorder's Office have that was relevant to this case? The judge continued, it appears that a new will was filed with the County Recorder's Office 2 days ago, dated 1 week before Richard Thompson's death. This will differ significantly from the will presented in this courtroom, and it raises questions about which document represents Mr. Thompson's true intentions. The room erupted in murmurs as this information sank in. A new will? Filed just a week before Dad died? How was that possible? Order, the judge said, banging her gavel. Order in the court. As the room fell silent again, I looked over at Mom, whose expression had changed from disappointment to something else, triumph, perhaps, or relief. And in that moment, a terrible suspicion began to form in my mind. Your Honor, Victoria said, rising to her feet, we had no knowledge of this new will. Nor did we, David added, also standing. The judge nodded. I understand that this development comes as a surprise to both parties. However, given the circumstances, I have no choice but to recess this hearing until this new document can be thoroughly examined and its authenticity verified. We will reconvene in 1 week, at which time we will determine which will should be considered the final expression of Richard Thompson's wishes. As the judge adjourned the hearing, I felt a sense of disbelief mixed with dawning horror. A new will, filed just a week before Dad died? It seemed too coincidental, too perfectly timed to benefit Mom. And as I watched her gather her belongings, a confident smile on her face, I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, she was behind this. As we left the courtroom, I confronted Mom in the hallway. You knew about this, didn't you? I asked, my voice shaking with anger. Knew about what? She replied, her expression innocent. The new will. The one that was supposedly filed just a week before Dad died. Mom's eyes widened in mock surprise. A new will? I had no idea. Don't lie to me, Mom. I can see it in your eyes. You're behind this. Clara, that's ridiculous, she said, though her voice lacked conviction. Why would I lie about something like that? Because you're desperate to get what you think you deserve, and you're willing to do whatever it takes to get it. That's enough, Michael said, stepping between us. We don't know anything for sure yet. Don't we? I asked, turning to face him. Think about it, Michael. A new will appears out of nowhere, filed just a week before Dad died, and it supposedly benefits Mom more than the original will. Who else would have the motive and opportunity to fabricate something like that? You're jumping to conclusions, Sarah said softly. We don't know the details of this new will yet. But we can guess, can't we? I shot back. It probably leaves everything to Mom, or at least a much larger portion than what Dad originally intended. Even if it does, Michael argued, we need to verify its authenticity before we start making accusations. And how do you propose we do that? I asked, my frustration mounting. Ask Mom nicely if she forged Dad's signature. That's enough, Clara, Michael said, his voice firm. We're not going to solve this by fighting in the courthouse hallway. He's right, Sarah added. We need to figure out what's going on before we start pointing fingers. As we stood there, divided and uncertain, Mom seized the opportunity to make her escape. I'm sorry you feel that way, Clara, she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. I hope someday you can find it in your heart to trust your own mother. With that, she turned and walked away, her lawyer following close behind, leaving us to grapple with the implications of this new development. The ride home was silent, each of us lost in our own thoughts. I couldn't shake the feeling that Mom was behind this new will, that she had somehow managed to fabricate a document that would give her what she wanted. But how? And why now, after all this time? That evening, as I sat in my apartment, staring out at the city lights, my phone rang. It was David, our lawyer. "Clara," he said, his voice serious, "I think you should come to my office tomorrow morning. There's something you need to see." "What is it?" I asked, my heart pounding. "I'd rather show you in person. Can you be here at 9? "Yes," I replied, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know what he had to show me. "I'll be there." As I hung up the phone, a sense of dread washed over me. Whatever David had to show me, I knew it would change everything, that it would reveal the truth about this new will and Mom's role in its creation. The next morning, I arrived at David's office promptly at 9, my stomach churning with anxiety. The receptionist led me to a conference room where David was waiting, along with another man I didn't recognize. "Clara," David said, rising to greet me. "Thank you for coming. This is Marcus Reed, a forensic document examiner I've consulted regarding this new will." I shook Marcus's hand, noting his serious expression and the briefcase at his feet. "What's going on, David? What did you need to show me?" David gestured for me to sit. "Marcus has examined both wills, the original one dated January 15th of last year, and this new one dated 1 week before Richard's death. He's found some discrepancies." "What kind of discrepancies?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Marcus opened his briefcase and removed 2 documents, placing them on the table in front of me. "The original will is authentic, no doubt about it. The signature, the notarization, the paper, it all checks out." He paused, pointing to the second document. "This new will, however, raises some red flags. For starters, the paper is different from what Richard typically used. It's a higher quality bond paper, not the standard legal paper he preferred." "Maybe he just used whatever was available," I suggested, though I knew Dad was particular about such things. "Perhaps," Marcus conceded. "But there are other issues. The signature is a very good forgery, almost identical to Richard's genuine signature. However, under magnification, you can see slight hesitations and lifts that indicate it was traced rather than signed freely." I felt a chill run down my spine. "So it's a forgery?" "Almost certainly," Marcus confirmed. "But what's most interesting is the notarization. The notary stamp and signature are authentic, belonging to a notary who was practicing in Sacramento at the time of Richard's death. However, when I contacted her, she had no recollection of notarizing this document for Richard Thompson." "Maybe she just forgot," I suggested, though I knew that was unlikely. "Notaries keep detailed journals of every document they notarize," Marcus explained. "I checked her journal for the date on this will, and there's no record of her notarizing any document for Richard Thompson on that day." "So the notarization is fake too?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "It appears so," Marcus confirmed. "Someone used her stamp and signature without her knowledge, which is a serious crime." I looked from Marcus to David, the implications of what they were telling me sinking in. "So this new will is a complete forgery?" "That's what the evidence suggests," David said gently. "But there's more." He slid a folder across the table to me. "I had someone do some digging into the filing of this new will with the county recorder's office. It was filed 2 days ago by a woman claiming to be Richard Thompson's executor. The name she gave was Eleanor Thompson." I felt the blood drain from my face. "Mom filed this forged will?" "It appears so," David confirmed. "But here's where it gets interesting. The woman who filed the document wasn't your mother. It was someone using your mother's name and identification." "What? How is that possible?" "According to the clerk at the recorder's office, the woman who filed the document didn't look like your mother. She was younger, with dark hair, and she seemed nervous. The clerk became suspicious and made a note of it in the system." I stared at David, my mind racing. "So someone stole Mom's identity to file this forged will? But who would do that? And why?" "I have a theory," David said, exchanging a look with Marcus. "But I need to show you something else first." He opened his laptop and turned it toward me, displaying a surveillance video. "This is from the security camera at the county recorder's office. It shows the woman who filed the will." As I watched the video, my eyes widened in disbelief. The woman who had filed the forged will, the woman who had stolen Mom's identity, was someone I knew very well. It was Sarah. Continua a história. The world seemed to tilt on its axis as I stared at the screen, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. Sarah, my gentle, empathetic sister who had seemed so torn throughout the hearing, was the one who had filed the forged will. But why? How could she do something like this? "I don't understand," I said, my voice shaking. "Sarah wouldn't do this. She couldn't." "Are you certain?" David asked, his expression sympathetic. "The evidence is pretty compelling." "But why?" I asked, looking from the screen to David. "What would she have to gain by forging Dad's will and filing it under Mom's name?" That's the question, isn't it? David replied. Marcus and I have been discussing possible motives, and we've come up with a few theories. He paused, choosing his words carefully. The most likely scenario is that Sarah was working with your mother to create this forged will, but something went wrong, and Sarah had to file it herself, perhaps because your mother was unable to for some reason. No, I said, shaking my head. Sarah wouldn't conspire with Mom against us. She was just as upset as we were about Mom challenging the will. Was she? David asked gently. Or was she just better at hiding her true feelings? I thought back to the hearing, to Sarah's hesitant testimony, to her apparent conflict about whether Dad had intended to provide more for Mom. Had that conflict been genuine, or had it been an act? Had she been playing us all along? There's another possibility, Marcus interjected. Sarah could be acting alone, perhaps with the intention of exposing your mother later and positioning herself as the hero who uncovered the fraud. That's convoluted, I said, though I couldn't dismiss it entirely. Sarah had always been the peacemaker in our family, the one who tried to smooth over conflicts. Maybe this was her way of resolving the situation, albeit in a misguided and illegal way. Or, David suggested, she could be working with someone else entirely, someone who has their own agenda regarding your father's estate. Who else would have an agenda? I asked, though a terrible suspicion was beginning to form in my mind. That's what we need to find out, David said. But first, we need to decide how to proceed. We have evidence of a forged will and identity theft, both serious crimes. We could go to the authorities with this information. What would happen if we did? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Sarah would likely face criminal charges, David said frankly. Forgery, identity theft, possibly fraud depending on her intentions. Your mother might also face charges if she was involved. I felt sick to my stomach. The thought of Sarah being arrested, of having a criminal record, of possibly going to jail, it was unbearable. But at the same time, she had committed serious crimes, crimes that could have had devastating consequences for our family. Is there any other option? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. We could confront Sarah with the evidence, David suggested. Give her a chance to explain herself, to come clean before we involve the authorities. And if she refuses? I asked. Then we may have to consider legal action, David said gently. But that would be a last resort. I nodded, though I wasn't sure I had the strength to confront Sarah, to face the possibility that my own sister had betrayed me in such a profound way. I need some time to think, I said, rising from my chair. Can I get copies of this evidence? Of course, David said, handing me a folder. But Clara, you need to be careful. If Sarah is capable of something like this, there's no telling what else she might do. I understand, I replied, though I wasn't sure I did understand. How could my own sister, the person I had grown up with, shared secrets with, relied on for support, do something like this? As I left David's office and stepped out into the bright Sacramento sunshine, I felt as if I were walking through a nightmare. The world around me seemed normal, people hurrying along the sidewalk, cars honking in the distance, the general hum of a city going about its business, but my world had been turned upside down, shattered by a revelation I never could have anticipated. I drove to Sarah's apartment, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. I needed to confront her, to hear her side of the story, but I was terrified of what I might learn. What if she admitted to forging Dad's will? What if she confessed to working with Mom, or worse, with someone else entirely? How would I ever be able to trust her again? Sarah lived in a small apartment in Midtown, a cozy space filled with plants, books, and the eclectic collection of knickknacks she had accumulated over the years. As I stood outside her door, key in hand, I took a deep breath, trying to prepare myself for what lay ahead. I let myself in, calling out, "Sarah? Are you home?" No response. I walked through the small living room, noting the neatly arranged books on the shelves, the thriving plants on the windowsill, the cozy throw blanket draped over the couch. Everything looked normal, peaceful, a stark contrast to the turmoil in my mind. I found her in the bedroom, sitting on the edge of her bed, staring at a photograph in her hands. As I approached, I realized it was a picture of Dad, taken during our last vacation to Lake Tahoe. He was smiling, his arm around Sarah, both of them bathed in the golden light of a summer evening. "Sarah?" I said softly. She looked up, her eyes red-rimmed, her expression guilty. "Clara, what are you doing here?" "I need to talk to you," I said, sitting beside her on the bed. "About Dad's will." Sarah flinched, her grip tightening on the photograph. "What about it?" "I know, Sarah," I said gently. "I know about the forged will." Tears welled in her eyes, spilling down her cheeks. "How did you find out?" "David hired a forensic document examiner," I explained. "He confirmed that the new will is a forgery. And the surveillance footage from the county recorder's office shows you filing it." Sarah's shoulders shook with sobs, her body trembling with the force of her emotions. I'm so sorry, Clara. I never meant for it to go this far. Why, Sarah? I asked, my voice breaking. Why would you do something like this? She looked up at me, her eyes filled with pain and regret. I did it for Dad. For Dad? I asked, incredulous. How could forging his will be for him? Because I know what he wanted, Clara, she said, her voice earnest. I know he wanted to provide more for Mom, but he was worried about her spending, about her ability to manage a large inheritance. He was trying to find a way to balance his desire to take care of her with his concerns about her financial irresponsibility. And you thought forging a will was the solution? I asked, though I was beginning to understand her twisted logic. No, she said, shaking her head. I never intended for it to be filed. I just wanted to create a document that showed what Dad might have wanted, something we could use as a starting point for negotiations with Mom. Then how did it end up being filed? I asked. Sarah hesitated, her gaze dropping to the photograph in her hands. Mom found out what I was doing. She said if I didn't file it, she would tell everyone that I was trying to defraud the family, that I was trying to cheat you and Michael out of your inheritance. I stared at her, horrified. Mom blackmailed you? Yes, Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. She said she would ruin my reputation, that I would lose my job, that no one would ever trust me again. And you believed her? I asked, though I knew Mom could be convincing when she wanted to be. She showed me emails, Clara, Sarah explained, her voice trembling. Emails she had written to my boss, to the nursing board, to the local newspaper. All accusing me of fraud, of trying to steal from my own family. I felt a surge of anger toward Mom, of betrayal so profound it took my breath away. She had manipulated Sarah, used her own daughter's fears and insecurities against her, all to get what she wanted. So you filed the forged will? I asked, my voice soft. Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face. I used her ID. She said it wouldn't be a problem, that no one would question it. I was so scared, Clara. I didn't know what else to do. I wrapped my arms around her, holding her as she sobbed against my shoulder. My anger had been replaced by a profound sense of sadness, for Sarah, for our family, for the father we had lost and the mother who had betrayed us in such a cruel way. We need to tell Michael, I said finally. And we need to figure out what to do about Mom. Sarah pulled away, her expression fearful. What if she goes through with her threats? What if she ruins my life? She won't, I said, though I wasn't entirely convinced. We won't let her. But how can we stop her? Sarah asked. She has those emails. She could send them at any time. We'll deal with it, I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. Together. As we sat there, two sisters united against a mother who had become our adversary, I wondered how we had reached this point, how our family had fractured so completely. Dad's death had left a void that had been filled not with grief and support, but with greed, manipulation, and betrayal. But as I looked at Sarah, at her tear-streaked face and her eyes filled with regret, I knew that we had to try to repair what had been broken, to find a way forward that honored Dad's memory and preserved what was left of our family. Let's call Michael, I said, reaching for my phone. We need to face this together. Sarah nodded, her expression still fearful but determined. Together. As I dialed Michael's number, I felt a glimmer of hope, a small spark of light in the darkness that had enveloped our family. We had a long road ahead of us, filled with difficult conversations and painful decisions, but we would face it together, as siblings, as the children of the man who had loved us enough to plan for a future without him. Continua a história. Michael arrived at Sarah's apartment 20 minutes later, his expression a mixture of concern and confusion. As Sarah and I explained what had happened, her creation of the forged will, Mom's blackmail, the filing of the document under false pretenses, I watched his face change from disbelief to anger to a profound sadness that mirrored my own. I don't understand, he said, running a hand through his hair. Mom blackmailed you? Why would she do something like that? Because she's desperate, Sarah said, her voice trembling. She's terrified of losing the lifestyle she's accustomed to, of having to face the reality of her financial situation without Dad to support her. But to threaten her own daughter? Michael asked, his voice filled with disbelief. To manipulate you into committing a crime? She's always been manipulative, I reminded him. We've just never seen her go this far before. Michael sighed, pacing the small living room. So what do we do now? Do we go to the authorities? No, Sarah said, her voice panicked. Please, Michael. I can't face criminal charges. I'd lose my nursing license, my job, everything. Sarah broke the law, Michael argued, though his tone was gentle. She forged a legal document and committed identity theft. Those are serious crimes. I know, Sarah whispered, tears welling in her eyes. But I didn't want to do it. Mom forced me. She still had a choice, Michael said, though he didn't sound entirely convinced of his own argument. I watched them, my heart aching for both of them. Michael was the logical one, the one who always saw things in black and white, right and wrong. But Sarah was the emotional one, the one who acted on feelings rather than logic, who had been manipulated by our mother into doing something she knew was wrong. Maybe there's another way, I suggested. A way to handle this without involving the authorities. Like what? Michael asked. Confront Mom? Hope she admits to blackmailing Sarah and agrees to drop the whole thing. It's worth a try, I said, though I knew it was a long shot. We can't just turn Sarah over to the police without giving her a chance to make this right. Michael sighed, running a hand over his face. I don't know, Clara. This is a mess. A huge, complicated mess. I know, I admitted. But we're family. We have to try to work this out together. He looked from me to Sarah, his expression conflicted. What if Mom doesn't back down? What if she goes through with her threats? Then we'll deal with it, I said, though I wasn't sure how. But we have to give her the chance to do the right thing first. Michael nodded reluctantly. Okay. We'll talk to Mom. But if this doesn't work, we're going to the authorities. I can't let Sarah get away with this, and I can't let Mom get away with blackmail. Fair enough, I agreed, though I dreaded the coming confrontation with Mom. We decided to meet at Mom's house the next day, a neutral territory where we could have this difficult conversation without the risk of being overheard by neighbors or passers-by. As I drove home that evening, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking into a trap, that Mom would find a way to turn this situation to her advantage, to manipulate us yet again. The next morning, the three of us arrived at Mom's house simultaneously, our cars pulling into the driveway in a synchronized arrival that felt both planned and fateful. The house, a sprawling ranch-style home in an upscale Sacramento neighborhood, looked the same as it always had, immaculately maintained, with perfectly manicured lawns and flower beds that Mom tended to with meticulous care. But as we walked up the stone path to the front door, I felt as if we were approaching a fortress, a place where we would face our greatest challenge yet. Mom opened the door before we could knock, as if she had been waiting for us. She was dressed in a simple but elegant pantsuit, her blonde hair styled perfectly, her makeup flawless. She looked every bit the sophisticated, wealthy widow, but there was a hardness in her eyes that hadn't been there before, a coldness that made me shiver. Children, she said, her voice smooth as silk. What a pleasant surprise. To what do I owe the honor? We need to talk, Mom, Michael said, his tone firm but not aggressive. Of course, she replied, stepping aside to let us enter. Come in. I just made coffee. As we followed her into the kitchen, I couldn't help but notice how normal everything seemed, the gleaming countertops, the state-of-the-art appliances, the smell of freshly brewed coffee filling the air. It was as if we were just dropping by for a casual visit, not about to engage in a confrontation that could determine the future of our family. Mom poured us each a cup of coffee, her movements graceful and unhurried. So, she said, taking a seat at the kitchen table, what's on your minds? We know about the forged will, Mom, I said, deciding to be direct. And we know you blackmailed Sarah into filing it. Mom's expression didn't change, but I saw a flicker of something in her eyes, surprise, perhaps, or annoyance that we had uncovered her scheme. I have no idea what you're talking about, she said, taking a sip of her coffee. A forged will? Blackmail? That sounds like something out of a bad movie. Don't play dumb, Mom, Michael said, his voice tight with anger. We have evidence. Sarah told us everything. Mom looked at Sarah, her expression cold and calculating. Did she now? And what exactly did she tell you? That you threatened to ruin her reputation, to send emails to her boss and the nursing board accusing her of fraud, I said. That you forced her to file the forged will using your ID. Mom laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. That's ridiculous. Why would I do something like that? Because you want Dad's money, Michael said bluntly. You want to maintain your lifestyle, and you don't care who you have to hurt to get what you want. That's not true, Mom said, though her voice lacked conviction. I loved your father. I just want what's fair. What's fair is what Dad left you in his will, I countered. Not what you think you deserve. And what about what I deserve? Mom asked, her voice rising. After 40 years of marriage, of raising his children, of supporting him through the ups and downs of his career? Don't I deserve to maintain the lifestyle I've grown accustomed to? Of course you do, Sarah said softly. But not at the expense of Dad's true intentions, not by manipulating and blackmailing your own children. Mom's eyes narrowed as she looked at Sarah. You always were the weak one, the emotional one. Too soft for your own good. At least I'm not a manipulative monster who would threaten her own daughter to get what she wants, Sarah shot back, her voice trembling with anger. Enough, Michael said, holding up his hands. This isn't getting us anywhere. Mom, we know what you did. We have evidence of the forged will and Sarah's involvement. We also have evidence of your blackmail. Like what? Mom challenged, though I could see a flicker of fear in her eyes. The emails you wrote to Sarah's boss and the nursing board, I said. Sarah told us about them. Did she now? Mom asked, a smug smile playing on her lips. And did she happen to mention that I never sent those emails? We stared at her, confused. What are you talking about? Michael asked. I wrote the emails, yes, Mom admitted, her tone casual. But I never sent them. They're still sitting in my drafts folder, waiting to be sent. Why would you do that? Sarah asked, her voice filled with disbelief. Because I knew you would tell your siblings, Mom said, her smile widening. I knew you would crack under pressure. And I wanted to see how long it would take for you to betray me. I felt a surge of anger so intense it made me dizzy. This was all a test? You manipulated Sarah, forced her to commit a crime, all to test her loyalty. Not just her loyalty, Mom said, her eyes moving from Sarah to me to Michael. All of yours. I wanted to see which of you would stand by me, which of you would betray me. You're sick, Michael said, his voice low and dangerous. You're actually sick. Am I? Mom asked, raising an eyebrow. Or am I just a woman who knows how to get what she wants in a world that's determined to take it away from her? This isn't about the world taking anything away from you, I shot back. This is about you not being satisfied with what Dad left you, about you being willing to destroy your own family to get more. Your father left me a pittance, Mom said, her voice cold. $120,000 a year might seem like a lot to some people, but it's nothing compared to what I'm used to. It's nothing compared to what I deserve after 40 years of marriage. What you deserve is to be held accountable for your actions, Michael said. For blackmailing Sarah, for manipulating all of us. And how exactly are you going to do that? Mom asked, her tone challenging. Go to the police? Tell them that your sister forged a will and that I supposedly blackmailed her into doing it? Even if they believe you, Sarah will still face criminal charges. Is that what you want? We fell silent, because she was right. Even if we could prove that Mom had blackmailed Sarah, Sarah had still committed a crime. And the consequences of that crime could be devastating. Look, Mom said, her tone softening slightly. I know I've made some mistakes. I know I've hurt you. But I'm still your mother. We're still family. Can't we find a way to resolve this without destroying each other? What do you propose? Michael asked, though I could tell he was skeptical. A compromise, Mom said. We tear up the forged will, we forget this ever happened. In return, you agree to give me a larger portion of Dad's estate. Not 60%, as the forged will stipulates, but 45%. The rest can be divided equally among the three of you. And what about the emails? Sarah asked, her voice trembling. The ones you wrote to my boss and the nursing board? I'll delete them, Mom promised. They'll never be sent. We looked at each other, weighing our options. Mom's proposal was still far more generous than what Dad had left her in his will, but it was less than what she had been demanding. And more importantly, it would allow us to put this whole mess behind us without involving the authorities, without Sarah facing criminal charges. I need some time to think, Michael said, rising from his chair. Of course, Mom replied, though I could see the triumph in her eyes. She had us exactly where she wanted us, backed into a corner with no good options. As we left Mom's house and stood in the driveway, the morning sun warm on our faces, I felt a profound sense of defeat. We had come here seeking justice, seeking to hold Mom accountable for her actions. But we were leaving with yet another compromise, another concession that would allow her to get more than what Dad had intended. What do we do? Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Michael sighed, running a hand through his hair. I don't see that we have much choice. If we go to the authorities, Sarah faces criminal charges. If we don't accept Mom's offer, she could send those emails at any time. So we just give in? I asked, though I knew he was right. We let her get away with this? For now, Michael said. But this isn't over. We need to find a way to protect ourselves, to make sure Mom can't manipulate us like this again. As we stood there, three siblings united against a mother who had become our adversary, I wondered if we would ever be able to repair the damage that had been done, to rebuild the trust that had been broken. Dad's death had left a void that had been filled with greed, manipulation, and betrayal, but as I looked at my brother and sister, I knew that we had to try, that we owed it to Dad and to ourselves to find a way forward that honored his memory and preserved what was left of our family. Continua a história. The following weeks were a strange blend of tension and relief as we navigated the aftermath of our confrontation with Mom. We agreed to her terms, signing a new agreement that gave her 45% of Dad's estate while dividing the remaining 55% equally among the three of us. The forged will was destroyed, the threatening emails deleted, and a fragile truce was established. But the peace felt hollow, a temporary ceasefire in a war that had fundamentally changed our family dynamics. Mom, having gotten much of what she wanted, became almost pleasant in her interactions with us, as if the conflict had never happened. She hosted dinners, called regularly to check in, and even offered to help Sarah with a down payment on a new apartment. But beneath the surface of this renewed civility, I could feel the lingering resentment, the unspoken accusations that hung in the air like a toxic fog. Michael, ever the pragmatist, suggested we create a family trust to manage our inheritances, a legal structure that would protect our assets and prevent Mom from attempting to manipulate us financially in the future. We met with a financial advisor and an attorney, setting up safeguards that would make it difficult for any one person to take advantage of another. It was a practical solution to a practical problem, but it did little to heal the emotional wounds that had been inflicted. Sarah, meanwhile, struggled with guilt and anxiety, often calling me late at night to talk about her fears. What if Mom changed her mind? What if the forged will resurfaced? What if someone found out what she had done? I tried to reassure her, to remind her that we had destroyed the evidence and that Mom had no reason to expose her now that she had gotten what she wanted, but my words did little to ease her troubled mind. As for me, I found myself withdrawing, creating distance not just from Mom but from Michael and Sarah as well. The betrayal had cut deeper than I wanted to admit, not just Mom's manipulation but Sarah's willingness to go along with it, even under duress. I had always considered our sibling bond to be unbreakable, but the events of the past few months had revealed cracks in that bond that I wasn't sure could ever be fully repaired. It was during this time of uneasy peace that I discovered something that would once again turn our world upside down. I was going through Dad's home office, sorting through his papers and personal effects as we had agreed to do, when I came across a locked drawer in his desk. I had seen him open it countless times, but I had never paid much attention to its contents. Now, curious, I searched for the key, finally finding it in a small envelope taped to the underside of the desk. Inside the drawer, I found a collection of documents that would change everything I thought I knew about our family's financial situation. There were bank statements from accounts I had never known existed, investment portfolios with substantial balances, and legal documents that suggested Dad had been planning something far more complex than the simple will we had been fighting over. But it was the letter, tucked into a manila envelope at the back of the drawer, that truly shocked me. It was dated 2 days before Dad's death, addressed to all 3 of us, and marked, "To be opened in the event of my death or if you believe your mother is attempting to defraud you." With trembling hands, I opened the envelope and began to read. "My dearest children," it began, in Dad's familiar handwriting. "If you are reading this, it means either that I have passed away or that you have discovered your mother's attempts to manipulate my estate. Either way, I need to tell you the truth about our family's financial situation and my intentions for your future." I sank into Dad's leather chair, my heart pounding as I continued to read. "First, let me say that I love you all more than words can express. You have been the joy of my life, the reason for my success, and the legacy I am most proud of. It is because of this love that I have taken steps to protect you, not just from the uncertainties of life but from the unfortunate reality of your mother's financial irresponsibility. As you may have guessed, the will I had my attorney prepare is not the complete picture of my estate planning. Over the years, I have set aside substantial assets in various trusts and accounts that your mother knows nothing about. These assets are intended to provide for your futures, to ensure that you have the means to pursue your dreams and build lives of your own, independent of your mother's influence. I have also made provisions for your mother, though not in the way she might expect. The annual allowance of $120,000 mentioned in the will is supplemented by a trust that will provide her with an additional $80,000 per year, payable directly to her creditors to cover any outstanding debts. This arrangement ensures that she is provided for while also protecting the bulk of my estate from her impulsive spending habits. I know this may seem harsh, but I have spent 40 years watching your mother struggle with financial management, bailing her out of one financial crisis after another. I love her, but I cannot in good conscience leave her in control of a substantial inheritance that would likely be squandered in a matter of years. The documents in this drawer provide details of these additional arrangements, including contact information for the financial advisor who can help you access the trusts and accounts I have established. Please use this information wisely, and please try to understand that my actions, while perhaps seeming secretive, were motivated by love and a desire to protect all of you. If your mother is challenging the will, as I suspect she might, please know that I anticipated this possibility. The forged will she has likely created, and yes, I know her well enough to be certain she would attempt such a thing, is just one of many tactics she might employ. Do not be swayed by emotional appeals or claims of my supposed intentions. Trust the legal documents, trust the professionals I have put in place to assist you, and most importantly, trust each other. I love you all, and I am proud of the people you have become. Take care of each other, and remember that family, in its truest form, is about love and support, not money and possessions. With all my love, Dad. Tears streamed down my face as I finished reading the letter, my emotions a turbulent mix of grief, relief, and anger. Dad had known. He had known Mom would challenge the will, had known she might even resort to forgery, and he had put safeguards in place to protect us. But he had also kept these arrangements secret, leaving us to face Mom's manipulation without the full knowledge of his intentions. I gathered the documents from the drawer, my mind racing with the implications of what I had discovered. This changed everything. Mom had gotten 45% of the estate we knew about, but there was so much more, assets she had no idea existed, resources that would ensure our financial security for years to come. But there was also a deeper truth to confront, a painful reality that Dad's letter had hinted at but not fully addressed. Mom's financial issues were more serious than any of us had realized, her spending habits more destructive. The annual allowance of $200,000 that Dad had arranged for her was substantial, but it was also a clear indication of the extent of her financial problems. As I sat in Dad's office, surrounded by the evidence of his careful planning and his concern for our future, I knew that I had to share this discovery with Michael and Sarah, that we had to decide together how to move forward. But I also knew that this revelation would once again test our fragile family bonds, that it would force us to confront uncomfortable truths about our mother and about ourselves. I called Michael and Sarah, asking them to meet me at Dad's house. As I waited for them to arrive, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were approaching another crossroads, another moment that would determine the future of our family. The inheritance hearing had been a battle, the confrontation with Mom a truce, but this was something else entirely. This was the truth, the whole truth, and it had the power to either heal us or destroy us completely. Continua a história. Michael arrived first, his expression curious as he let himself into the house. Clara? You said it was urgent? I nodded, gesturing for him to join me in Dad's office. I found something. Something that changes everything. Sarah arrived a few minutes later, her face etched with worry. What's going on? Your call sounded intense. I took a deep breath, spreading the documents from Dad's desk drawer across the polished surface. Dad knew. He knew Mom would challenge the will, maybe even that she would forge a new one. He made other arrangements. As I explained what I had found, the additional accounts, the trusts, the letter explaining his reasoning, I watched their expressions change from confusion to disbelief to a dawning understanding. So Mom got 45% of the estate we knew about, Michael said, his voice filled with wonder, but there's all this other money that she has no idea exists. That's right, I confirmed. And according to Dad's letter, these assets are specifically for us, to ensure our financial security independent of Mom's influence. Sarah picked up one of the bank statements, her eyes widening at the balance. This is more money than I've ever seen in my life. More than all of us have seen combined, Michael added, his voice hushed with awe. But why didn't he tell us? Sarah asked, her brow furrowed with confusion. Why did he let us go through that whole ordeal with Mom, fighting over a will that wasn't even the complete picture of his estate planning? I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. I think he wanted to test us, in a way. To see if we could stand together, if we could handle Mom's manipulation without turning on each other. And we almost failed that test, Michael said, his expression grim. We were ready to accept Mom's compromise, to give her more than what Dad had originally intended. Because we were trying to protect Sarah, I reminded him. Because we didn't want her to face criminal charges. Still, Michael said, shaking his head. Dad must be rolling in his grave knowing we gave in to Mom's blackmail. But we didn't give in to the forged will, Sarah pointed out. We negotiated a compromise that gave her less than what she was demanding. Maybe that's what Dad would have wanted, for us to find a middle ground, to preserve what was left of our family. I looked from Sarah to Michael, seeing the truth in her words. Dad had always been a peacemaker, the one who tried to find common ground in disputes. Maybe he would have approved of our compromise, not because it was the best financial decision but because it was an attempt to maintain family unity. Regardless, I said, bringing the conversation back to the present, we have a decision to make. Do we tell Mom about these additional assets, or do we keep them to ourselves as Dad intended? Michael was silent for a moment, considering. Dad was clear that these assets were meant to be kept secret from Mom, that they were specifically for us. I think we should respect his wishes. But what about the trust he set up for her? Sarah asked. The additional $80,000 a year to pay her creditors? Shouldn't we tell her about that? That's a good question, I admitted. On one hand, it would help her financially, relieve some of the pressure that's driving her to manipulate us. On the other hand, it would reveal that Dad didn't fully trust her with his money, which could cause even more conflict. Maybe we could set it up anonymously, Michael suggested. Arrange for the payments to be made to her creditors without her knowing where the money is coming from. That's a possibility, I said, though I wasn't entirely comfortable with the idea of deceiving Mom, even if she had deceived us. As we discussed our options, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were missing something, that there was a deeper truth we needed to confront. Dad's letter had hinted at Mom's serious financial issues, but it hadn't fully explained the extent of her problems or why they had become so severe. I think we need to understand Mom's financial situation better, I said finally. Before we make any decisions, we need to know exactly what we're dealing with. How do we do that? Sarah asked. Mom would never tell us the truth about her finances. Maybe we don't have to ask her, Michael suggested. Dad's financial advisor might have some insight. Or we could hire a forensic accountant to look into her spending habits. That feels invasive, Sarah said, though she didn't dismiss the idea entirely. More invasive than forging a will and blackmailing your own daughter? Michael asked, his tone sharp. That's not fair, Sarah retorted. I was trying to fix a situation, not make it worse. Weren't you, though? Michael countered. By creating that forged will, you gave Mom exactly what she wanted, a way to challenge Dad's true intentions and get more money. I was trying to create a compromise, Sarah shot back, her voice rising. Something that would satisfy Mom while still honoring what I thought Dad might have wanted. And look how well that turned out, Michael said sarcastically. You ended up getting blackmailed and facing criminal charges. Enough, I said, stepping between them. Fighting about this isn't going to help. We need to work together, to figure out the best way forward. They fell silent, though the tension between them was palpable. I could see the hurt in Sarah's eyes, the frustration in Michael's expression. The events of the past few months had strained our sibling bond to its breaking point, and I wasn't sure it could withstand much more. Look, I said, my voice softer. Dad wanted us to trust each other, to take care of each other. That's what we need to focus on, not blaming each other for past mistakes. Michael sighed, running a hand through his hair. You're right. I'm sorry, Sarah. I shouldn't have said those things. It's okay, Sarah replied, though her voice was still tight with emotion. You're not wrong. I did make things worse by creating that forged will. You were trying to help, I reminded her. Your intentions were good, even if your methods were misguided. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of our shared history filling the room. Dad's office, once a place of business and authority, had become a sanctuary where we could confront the truth about our family, however painful that truth might be. So what do we do? Sarah asked finally. About Mom, about the money, about everything? I think we need to talk to Dad's financial advisor, I said. Get a better understanding of the full scope of his estate planning. Then we can make an informed decision about how to proceed. And in the meantime? Michael asked. Do we tell Mom about any of this? I think we keep it to ourselves for now, I decided. At least until we have all the information we need to make the right decision. They both nodded, though I could see the uncertainty in their expressions. We were walking a fine line, trying to balance Dad's wishes with our own moral compass, trying to protect ourselves without further damaging our relationship with Mom. As we gathered the documents and prepared to leave Dad's office, I felt a sense of both hope and trepidation. The discovery of Dad's additional estate planning had changed everything, providing us with resources we had never known existed and a deeper understanding of his intentions. But it had also raised new questions, new challenges that we would have to face together as a family. Whatever lay ahead, I knew that the path would not be easy. There would be difficult conversations, painful revelations, and choices that would test our values and our bonds. But as I looked at my brother and sister, at the shared determination in their eyes, I felt a glimmer of hope, a belief that we could navigate this new reality together, honoring Dad's memory while creating a future that was true to his values and our own. Continua a história. The following week, we met with Dad's financial advisor, a man named Robert Harrison who had been managing Dad's investments for over 20 years. His office, located in a sleek downtown Sacramento high-rise, was the epitome of financial success, floor-to-ceiling windows with a view of the city skyline, expensive furniture, and an air of quiet confidence that spoke of decades of experience. Clara, Michael, Sarah, Robert said, rising from his leather chair to greet us. It's good to see you all, though I wish it were under better circumstances. As we settled into the chairs opposite his desk, I couldn't help but notice the framed photograph on his bookshelf, a picture of Dad and Robert fishing on Lake Tahoe, both men smiling broadly as they held up their catch. They had been more than just client and advisor, they had been friends, confidants who had shared not just financial strategies but life experiences. We found Dad's letter, I began, placing the documents from his desk drawer on Robert's desk. And these additional accounts and trusts. Robert nodded, his expression serious but not surprised. I wondered if you would discover those. Your father was very specific about when and how you should be informed of their existence. Why did he keep them a secret? Michael asked. Why let us go through that whole ordeal with Mom without telling us there was more to his estate? Robert sighed, steepling his fingers on his desk. Your father was a complex man, Michael. He loved your mother deeply, but he was also a realist. He knew her strengths, her kindness, her loyalty, her devotion to your family, but he also knew her weaknesses, particularly when it came to financial matters. Did he talk to you about his concerns? Sarah asked, her voice soft. Often, Robert confirmed. Over the years, he expressed growing worry about your mother's spending habits, her tendency to make impulsive financial decisions without considering the long-term consequences. Like what? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Robert hesitated, choosing his words carefully. There were several instances where your mother accumulated significant credit card debt, investments in questionable ventures, even a failed attempt to start a high-end boutique that cost your father nearly $200,000. I felt my eyes widen in surprise. Dad had never mentioned any of this to us, never hinted at the extent of Mom's financial issues. He had always presented a united front with Mom, a picture of marital harmony and financial stability. Your father always covered these losses without making your mother feel inadequate or ashamed, Robert continued. He saw it as his responsibility to provide for his family, to smooth over any financial difficulties without causing conflict. But it must have been a strain, Michael said. Financially and emotionally. It was, Robert admitted. Which is why he began creating these additional arrangements, setting aside assets that would be protected from your mother's influence while still ensuring she was provided for. What about the trust for Mom? Sarah asked. The one that provides an additional $80,000 a year to pay her creditors. Robert nodded, pulling up a document on his computer. That's part of a larger arrangement your father established about 5 years ago. He was concerned that your mother's debts were becoming unmanageable, that her spending was spiraling out of control. The trust ensures that her essential expenses are covered while also addressing her outstanding debts in a way that doesn't embarrass her or draw attention to her financial issues. So Dad was essentially paying off Mom's debts without her knowing it? I asked, trying to wrap my head around the complexity of Dad's planning. In a way, yes, Robert confirmed. The payments are made through a third-party administrator, so your mother believes she's using her annual allowance to cover these expenses. In reality, the trust is supplementing that allowance to ensure all her debts are paid. I felt a surge of conflicting emotions, admiration for Dad's thoughtful planning, sadness that he had felt the need to be so secretive, and anger that Mom's financial issues had become so serious. Does Mom have any idea that these arrangements exist? Michael asked. No, Robert said firmly. Your father was very clear that these should remain confidential, at least during his lifetime. He wanted to protect your mother's dignity while also protecting your inheritance. And now? Sarah asked. What happens to these arrangements now that Dad has passed away? Robert pulled up another document, his expression serious. According to the terms your father established, you now have control over these additional assets. The trusts for each of you are accessible immediately, and you can decide how and when to use them. As for your mother's trust, you can choose to continue the payments as arranged, modify them, or terminate them altogether. We looked at each other, the weight of this responsibility settling over us. Dad had trusted us with this complex financial legacy, believing that we would make decisions that honored his intentions while also taking care of our mother. Is there anything else we should know? I asked. Any other arrangements or considerations we should be aware of? Robert hesitated, his expression thoughtful. There is one more thing, though your father was very specific that this should only be shared if you felt it was absolutely necessary. He paused, as if weighing the importance of what he was about to reveal. Your father was concerned not just about your mother's current financial situation, but about her long-term security as well. He established a contingency fund that would provide for her care if she ever became unable to manage her own affairs, whether due to age, illness, or other circumstances. Like a nursing home or assisted living facility? Michael asked. Or in-home care, or whatever might be needed, Robert confirmed. The fund is substantial, designed to ensure that your mother would receive the best possible care without depleting her other resources or becoming a financial burden to any of you. I felt a lump form in my throat, touched by Dad's foresight and his continued concern for Mom's well-being, even as he took steps to protect his assets from her financial irresponsibility. Does Mom know about this contingency fund? Sarah asked. No, Robert replied. Your father felt that knowledge of such a fund might actually discourage her from taking care of her health, from making responsible decisions about her future care. So she could potentially need this care and not even know it's available? I asked, troubled by this possibility. That's why your father left the decision to you, Robert explained. He trusted that you would make the right choice, that you would balance your mother's need for care with the reality of her financial situation. As we left Robert's office and stepped out into the bustling Sacramento street, I felt overwhelmed by the complexity of Dad's estate planning, by the weight of the responsibility he had placed on us. We had come seeking answers, but we had left with more questions, with a deeper understanding of the challenges that lay ahead. What do we do now? Sarah asked as we stood on the sidewalk, the city noise swirling around us. I think we need to talk, I said, looking from Sarah to Michael. Really talk, about what we've learned and what it means for our family. Michael nodded, his expression serious. My place or yours? Yours, I decided. It's more neutral. As we drove to Michael's house, a modern home in a quiet Sacramento suburb, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were approaching another turning point, another moment that would determine the future of our family. The information we had learned from Robert had changed everything, providing us with a more complete picture of Dad's intentions and Mom's financial situation. But it had also raised difficult questions about our responsibilities as children, as heirs, and as a family. When we arrived at Michael's house, he led us to his living room, a spacious area with comfortable furniture and large windows that looked out onto a well-maintained backyard. As we settled onto the couches, each of us lost in our own thoughts, I knew that the conversation we were about to have would be one of the most difficult of our lives. So, Michael began, breaking the silence. Mom's financial issues are more serious than any of us realized. And Dad's arrangements to protect us from those issues are more complex than we could have imagined, I added. But what does it all mean? Sarah asked, her voice filled with uncertainty. How do we move forward from here? We looked at each other, the unspoken question hanging in the air. What was our responsibility to Mom, given the extent of her financial issues and Dad's clear intentions to protect us from them? And how could we balance that responsibility with our own needs and values, with the legacy Dad had left us? I think we need to decide how to handle Mom's trust, Michael said finally. Whether to continue the payments as arranged, modify them, or terminate them altogether. And what about the contingency fund for her care? I asked. Do we tell her about it, or keep it in reserve as Dad intended? And the additional assets Dad left for us, Sarah added. Do we use them now, or save them for the future? As we discussed these questions, I realized that there were no easy answers, no clear-cut solutions that would satisfy everyone. Each option came with its own set of challenges and consequences, its own moral and ethical considerations. I think we need to understand Mom's current financial situation better before we make any decisions, I said finally. We need to know exactly what we're dealing with. But how do we do that without invading her privacy? Sarah asked. Without betraying her trust even more than we already have. Maybe we don't have to investigate her finances directly, Michael suggested. Maybe we can observe her spending, look for signs of financial distress, and base our decisions on what we see. Or we could talk to her, I said, though I knew this would be the most difficult option. We could be honest about what we've learned, about Dad's concerns, and see how she responds. They both looked at me, their expressions a mixture of surprise and apprehension. Do you think that's a good idea? Michael asked. Given how she's acted in the past? I don't know, I admitted. But I do know that keeping secrets from each other is what got us into this mess in the first place. Maybe honesty, even if it's difficult, is the only way forward. As we sat there, three siblings grappling with the legacy of a father who had tried to protect us from the truth, I realized that our decision would say as much about us as it would about Mom. It would reveal our values, our priorities, our capacity for forgiveness and understanding. And whatever we decided, it would shape the future of our family for years to come. Continua a história. The decision to approach Mom directly wasn't an easy one, and we spent the next several days debating the pros and cons, rehearsing what we might say, and preparing ourselves for every possible reaction. In the end, though, we all agreed that honesty, however difficult, was the only path forward that had any chance of healing the fractures in our family. We chose to meet at a neutral location, a quiet corner table at the waterfront, one of Mom's favorite restaurants in Sacramento. The setting was elegant but comfortable, with soft lighting, white tablecloths, and large windows that offered a view of the Sacramento River. It was a place where we had celebrated many family occasions over the years, birthdays and anniversaries and graduations, and I hoped that the familiar surroundings might help to ease the tension of the conversation we needed to have. Mom arrived looking chic and confident, dressed in a tailored navy blue dress with a string of pearls at her throat. She greeted us with air kisses and a bright smile, as if we were simply gathering for a pleasant lunch rather than about to embark on one of the most difficult conversations of our lives. Children, she said, taking a seat at the table. How lovely to see you all together. It's been too long. We wanted to talk to you about something important, Mom, Michael began, after we had ordered our drinks. Mom's smile faltered slightly, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. Is everything all right? We found some of Dad's papers, I said gently. Documents that explain more about his estate planning. Mom's expression immediately became guarded, her posture stiffening. What kind of documents? Letters to us, additional accounts and trusts he set up, Sarah explained. Arrangements he made to provide for all of us while also protecting his assets. I watched Mom's face closely, saw the flicker of fear in her eyes before she masked it with a practiced smile. Your father was always so meticulous about his planning. It's one of the things I admired about him. He was also concerned about your financial situation, Mom, Michael said, his tone gentle but direct. He set up a trust to supplement your annual allowance, to help pay your creditors without embarrassing you or drawing attention to your debts. Mom's face paled, her hand tightening around her wine glass. I don't know what you're talking about. My finances are perfectly fine. Mom, we know about the credit card debt, the failed boutique, the questionable investments, I said, choosing my words carefully. Dad was worried about you, but he didn't want to shame you. That's why he kept these arrangements secret. Tears welled in Mom's eyes, her composure finally cracking under the weight of our revelations. He told you about those things? He shared my private financial matters with you. He didn't tell us directly, Sarah clarified. We found his letter, his explanations to his financial advisor. He was trying to protect you, to make sure you were provided for while also protecting his legacy. Mom's shoulders shook with sobs, her carefully constructed facade crumbling before our eyes. I never meant for it to get so out of control. I wanted to feel like I was contributing, like I had my own successes, not just living off your father's success. We understand that, Mom, I said, reaching across the table to touch her hand. But Dad was worried that your spending was becoming unsustainable, that it would eventually deplete the assets he had worked so hard to build. He thought I was frivolous, irresponsible, Mom said, her voice choked with emotion. He didn't trust me with his money. He trusted you with his love, with his heart, with 40 years of marriage, Michael countered. The financial arrangements weren't about a lack of trust in you as a person, but about his understanding of your strengths and weaknesses when it came to money management. Mom looked from Michael to me to Sarah, her eyes filled with a pain so deep it took my breath away. So what happens now? Are you going to cut me off, leave me with nothing but the annual allowance from the will? That's not what we want, Sarah said softly. We want to find a solution that honors Dad's intentions while also taking care of you, that allows us to move forward as a family. Then what do you propose? Mom asked, her voice trembling. We want to continue the trust arrangements Dad established, I explained. The additional $80,000 a year to pay your creditors, the contingency fund for your future care if needed. We also want to be more involved in your financial planning, to help you create a budget and make decisions that will ensure your long-term security. Mom hesitated, her expression conflicted. You want to control my money? No, Michael said firmly. We want to help you manage it, to provide guidance and support without taking away your autonomy. And what about the additional assets Dad left for us? Mom asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The ones he kept secret from me? They're ours, Mom, I said gently. Dad specifically intended for them to be protected from your influence, not because he didn't love you, but because he wanted to ensure our financial security as well. Mom nodded slowly, tears streaming down her face. I understand. I don't like it, but I understand. As we sat there, the truth finally out in the open, I felt a sense of relief mixed with sadness. Relief that we no longer had to maintain the pretense that everything was fine, that Mom's financial issues were under control. Sadness that it had taken Dad's death and a series of painful revelations for us to have this honest conversation. We need to rebuild trust, Mom, Sarah said, her voice soft but firm. All of us. We've all made mistakes, we've all hurt each other, but we're still family. We still love each other. Mom nodded, dabbing at her eyes with a linen napkin. I know. And I'm sorry. For everything. For challenging the will, for manipulating Sarah, for putting my own desires above what was best for our family. We're sorry too, I said, looking at Michael and Sarah. For not being more understanding, for not seeing how much you were struggling, for letting our own fears and insecurities drive our decisions. As we finished our lunch, the conversation gradually shifting to lighter topics, memories of Dad, plans for the upcoming holidays, stories about work and friends, I felt a sense of hope that I hadn't felt in months. The road ahead would not be easy, the wounds we had inflicted on each other would take time to heal, but for the first time since Dad's death, I believed that we could find a way forward, that we could rebuild our family on a foundation of honesty, understanding, and love. In the weeks that followed, we took concrete steps to implement our decisions. We met with Robert to formalize the trust arrangements, to establish a system that would provide for Mom's needs while also protecting our inheritance. We worked with a financial planner to create a budget for Mom, to help her develop healthier spending habits and make more informed financial decisions. And most importantly, we committed to regular family meetings, to open and honest communication about our feelings, our concerns, and our needs. The process was not without its challenges. Mom struggled with the loss of financial autonomy, with the realization that she would need to be more accountable for her spending. Michael, Sarah, and I had our own conflicts and disagreements, moments when old resentments resurfaced and new tensions emerged. But through it all, we held on to the commitment we had made to each other, to the belief that our family was worth fighting for, that the love we shared was stronger than the conflicts that had divided us. 6 months after Dad's death, as we gathered at Mom's house for Christmas, I looked around at my family and felt a sense of peace that had been absent for so long. Mom was hosting, her home beautifully decorated, her smile genuine as she moved among her guests. Michael and Sarah were helping in the kitchen, their easy banter a testament to the healing that had taken place between them. And I was setting the table, arranging the place settings with the same care and attention to detail that Dad had always shown. As we sat down to dinner, Mom raised her glass for a toast. "To Richard," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "To the man who loved us enough to plan for a future without him, who trusted us to honor his intentions while also taking care of each other. And to us, to the family he built, the family he loved, the family that will carry his legacy forward." We clinked our glasses, the sound echoing in the beautifully decorated dining room, and I felt Dad's presence with us, not as a ghost or a memory, but as a living part of the family he had created and the legacy he had left behind. The inheritance hearing had been a battle, the confrontation with Mom a truce, the discovery of Dad's additional arrangements a revelation. But through it all, we had learned something valuable about ourselves and about the nature of family, that it's not about perfection or absence of conflict, but about love, forgiveness, and the willingness to keep trying, even when things are difficult. As we finished our meal and moved to the living room for dessert and conversation, I felt a sense of gratitude for the journey we had been on, for the lessons we had learned, and for the family that had emerged stronger and more authentic from the fires of conflict and betrayal. Dad was gone, but his love lived on in the bonds that held us together, in the values that guided our decisions, and in the legacy of resilience and reconciliation that would define our family for generations to come. História finalizada.